up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at free agency, but not just for our Detroit Lions, no, but the rest of the NFC North. I'm talking the Packers, I'm talking the Bears, and the Minnesota Vikings. So let's get it started.
You know, I got to shout out DoseOfDion, man, because it was actually the first time I went live on YouTube. And, you know, guys don't know DoseOfDion. He put out a lot of good content for the Detroit Lions.
Welcome everybody to the video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're doing a little bit of a different camera angle because my computer is right here, so it's easier for me to see what I typed up and then I can show you guys on the screen. Today we're going to be talking about free agency and just kind of updating what each team in the NFC North has done, what they've accomplished in free agency, what their needs are heading into the draft after what they've done. You know, did they make big splash signings? Did they cut players? Because we had to know what our division is up to, right? We play these teams twice a year each, so that's 6 of our 17 games now. I love it, 17 games. That's great. Maybe 18 next year. Hold up. No, that's not how it works. That's what we're going to be doing in today's video. We're going to be taking a look at some free agency. So I'm going to throw it on the screen right now. As you can see, this is our Detroit Lions page, and yeah, there's a lot of names on there, but I'm going to go through what each thing means. That way, when we take a look at the other teams, you'll understand how I set this up. But it's pretty understanding. It says added there on the left. Added basically means a player was brought in this free agency period. And I'm not talking future contracts. This is more like once free agency kicked off, I think it was March 15th, and what moves they've made since then. So what players they've added. Now, that could be by a trade. It could be by a signing, but it's just players that were added to your roster. So for the Lions, there's a lot of guys on there, right? Terrell Williams, Rashad Perriman, Khalif Raymond, Damian Ratley, Alex Anzalone, Jamal Williams. I don't know why I'm reading these all, but I'm going to keep going. Tim Boyle, Quentin Dunbar, Corn Elder, Michael Brockers, Josh Hill, Randy Bullock, Charles Harris. A lot of names on there for the Detroit Lions. The next section, which is lost, are basically players that you had on your team last season but are now elsewhere. They went elsewhere. Again, it could be a trade, but a lot of times it's, you know, guys that hit free agency. Maybe you cut them, maybe they just walked, and then they signed elsewhere. So lost means they are somewhere else. So for the Detroit Lions, there's a lot of names there as well. A lot of corners: Trufant, Coleman, Galladay, Jones Jr., Agnew, Daniel, Davis, Daryl Roberts, Mohamed Sanu. By the way, Sanu signed with the Niners. I didn't know that. Miles Killebrew, Danny Shelton, Reggie Reagan, Christian Jones, Sodea Bushi, and Matt Prater. I miss you, Matt Prater. But those are players that were with the Lions last season and are now elsewhere. And then that brings me to the TBA, which could be TBD, like to be determined. But TBA for to be announced, I don't know why I labeled it that, are basically players that were with the team last season and are not with them right now. So they're not re-signed, but they're also not gone because they're still just free agents. And now this is subject to change, so make sure you look at the date if you're watching this video later. But Everson Griffin, James, Amendola, Harmon, Daw, Peterson, McRae, Bodine, but all of those guys are still just sitting there kind of as free agents right now. They're still available, so they just haven't signed anywhere, but they were with the Detroit Lions last season. And finally, you have the re-signed category, players that were re-signed, right? For us, Romeo Okwara, Jalen Raven, Dom Mulbach. Okwara got the big deal there, the 3 years, $39 million. And then, of course, I had to mention the Goff and Matthew Stafford trade. So that's kind of the setup for this. I guess a quick little overview. We won't touch too much on the Detroit Lions because, well, we talk about them all the time. But for the Detroit Lions, their free agency was kind of just, they stuck to their plan, so credit to them, was signing one-year deals. We're signing guys that had a chip on their shoulder, something to prove that we're going to be competitive for spots, and we're going to push players that are looking to potentially get a big contract or a big deal next offseason when the salary cap goes up, because that's what a lot of players have done this offseason. So that's kind of what the Lions were. They were kind of a landing spot for that, and you can see they overhauled the receiver position with guys getting big deals. Galladay, Jones, Agnew getting pretty strong deals there. The Lions went with one-year deals. Terrell Williams, Rashad Perriman, Khalif Raymond, Damian Ratley, signing 4 receivers to 1-year deals. There's only a couple guys they gave multiple years to, and that was Jamal Williams, so they gave 2 years. And also Michael Brockers, who they traded for, they gave him a new contract once they brought him in. But I think, yeah, aside from that, I think those are all 1-year deals. I think Josh Hill is also a 1-year deal. So that was kind of the Lions' plan, but credit to them, they stuck to it, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to fill out positions. That way there were no drafting needs, but instead of drafting just the players that they wanted, you know, players that they felt were best available, that kind of thing in this year's draft. And that's what they've done. They've really opened up pretty much every position, so that a lot of things are available in the draft for them. There's really no clear pressing needs. Now, could they get better at every position? Probably, but there's no clear pressing needs. I would say the only maybe obvious need here is probably another safety. But aside from that, technically you could go into the season, you'd probably be fine, but you could definitely upgrade in a lot of different areas. So that's what the Lions draft should be, is just drafting best available at this point, who they believe is the best available. So that's kind of what we expect, while also somewhat filling out needs. You know, there are still positions, because of all the 1-year deals at receiver, they could go that route, right? Because, you know, linebacker could definitely be that route. Cornerback, right? So Yeah, I mean, they filled out needs. Technically, they go in the season like this, but they still, need more talent, and they would like to get guys rookie deals because those aren't one-year deals. But they only have 6 picks in this year's draft, so it was kind of the Lions' plan for the first year to do this. They made a lot of moves, just not a lot of big splashes. Really, the only splasher was Romeo, and that was re-signing Romeo Okwara to a deal. But other than that, they lost a lot of players, so a lot of biggest turnover in the NFC North you will see by far. So let's move to the next team, and this is Minnesota, and you can just automatically see the difference. Like, look how many names we have compared to them. It's crazy. So when you look at Minnesota, let's go through theirs a little bit more in detail. They added Delvin Tomlinson, the defensive tackle from the Giants, younger defensive tackle. The defense for Minnesota was bad last year, and Mike Zimmer, known as the defensive guy, was not happy. He called it basically his worst defense, and he clearly went out in free agency and said, we gotta add help to this. So they gave Delvin Tomlinson a pretty big deal. In 4 years in the league, he's had 8 sacks from that defensive tackle position. He's a pretty nice player that's still young. So they gave him a nice multiple-year deal. Patrick Peterson was signed to a 1-year deal for the cornerback position as they add some help there, because last year they were mainly just relying on young, like rookie, first year, that type of cornerback. And this year they're like, hey, we got to get a vet. So they went out and got Patrick Peterson. They did bring in Weatherly to play defensive end, potentially across from Daniel Hunter, if they don't add someone else there, but they probably will in the draft. Xavier Woods, the safety, he signed to a pretty cheap deal. I think it was like $1.75 million, something like that. Big Vigil to add some linebacker depth behind Kendricks and Barr. Brought back Amir Abdullah. Man, every time I see that name, I kind of sad a little bit just to see how it didn't work out with Detroit. Look at Chad Beebe, who had the touchdown against Corn Elder for the game winner, which was one of the touchdowns that Elder gave up last season. That is a tough one, but he was brought back for some receiver depth as they're kind of looking at receiver number 3 for next season, trying to figure out who that will be, because of course they have Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, and they brought back Mackenzie Alexander, the corner that Lions could have showed some interest in, but they brought him back as well. I shouldn't say Mackenzie Alexander is re-signed. I guess I'm just usually used to saying that, but he was actually with Cincinnati last year, and he had a really strong season with Cincy as well. He's missed some time due to injuries. He was someone that I thought the Lions could have potentially targeted in free agency, but of course he went back to Minnesota. But with Minnesota, he had some really good years, and he fills out that slot cornerback position. That's been his role. He's been, like I said, he's been pretty good at it. He's actually been really good at it, especially with Minnesota. So that was a really nice signing to me. In terms of player lost, Kyle Rudolph went to the New York Giants, signed a 2-year, $12 million deal. They decided to move on from Riley Reif. Anthony Harris signed a $4 million deal, 1-year, $4 million deal. Mike Boone, one of their backup running backs behind Dalvin Cook, went elsewhere. Odenigbo, their defensive end, is gone, and it looks like Weatherly's probably an upgrade from Odenigbo, but they still gonna add help there. Mar Steven, the defensive tackle, is also lost, and he signed elsewhere. And you can see they got a lot of to-be-announced names with Dan Bailey, who they cut. Eric Wilson, linebacker, still out there. Todd Davis, George Iloka is still available. Rashad Hill, Sean Mannion. Sean Mannion started his career with the Rams, and actually he was an Oregon State quarterback, so I don't know why. I like that name for some reason. Wait, Sean Mannion. Sean Mannion, I see you. Okay. Brett Jones, Jaleel Johnson, Chris Jones. Remember Chris Jones from the Lions? Tay Hayes and Cordray Tankersley. Now, if I pronounce these names wrong, I'm sorry. I don't know all these players extremely well. But what are the Vikings looking to do this offseason? What did they really accomplish? Well, clearly they put an emphasis on adding defensive talent, because they were not happy with how the defense played last season. So that was kind of their focus here. Now, they only have 5 draft picks. Defensive end is one of them. Now, Daniel Hunter, there was that buzz out there that he was unhappy, but obviously he's still there, so he must be okay. We'll see what happens with that. But Hunter's expected to be there next season, and they had some injuries they had to deal with. But they could look to add a defensive end across from him, or at least some competition, because not a lot of people are super happy about that other defensive end position. I think what makes Delvin Tomlinson so valuable is that he played the nose tackle position the last 2 seasons. And by the way, in the last 2 seasons combined, he has 7 sacks. That's a lot with the Giants. But he could also get pressure, just like I said, and he could stop the run, and he's still very young. So he's young. He can stop the run. He's 318 pounds. It'll be interesting because Minnesota's probably going to hop into a 4-3, but you put him and Michael Pierce together, who opted out last season. Woo! Man, that's a strong defensive line. I'm being honest. That is a strong interior. And then Daniel Hunter on the outside. Now they're trying to figure out the other defensive line position, but that 4-3 is looking strong. Their biggest hole is offensive line. Now, they did bring back Dakota, which is nice, but the offensive line needs help. Really, left guard and left tackle could both be thrown into that mix. The thought is Urza Cleveland could go from right guard to left tackle, which would open up both the guard spots as potential needs. Starting 2 guards could have been Drew Samia and Hinton, but the thing is that it probably won't, because they did trade for Mason Cole, who does seem like an upgrade. Last season, he played almost 1,000 snaps, and he played better than Samia did. So he seems like a guy that could play at right guard if they need to. Urza to left tackle. And then that does open up the right guard where Cole could slide in, but then he could still use the left guard. Dakota Dozier was brought back, as we mentioned, but he did struggle, a lot last season. So for them, it's like, okay, we have pieces here because we brought him back. He could also play tackle, I believe. but we just want to upgrade it. We want it better. You know, we have pieces, but we want it better. And that seems like the offensive line would probably be that, and still use improvement there. So it still seems like offensive line, at least one, is still going to be something they target. And if they don't want to move Cleveland, then drafting a tackle early could be the move. Definitely need help on the offensive line. That is their clear need. And the thought is with that first round pick in this year's draft, in the middle of the draft, pick number 14, I believe, is where they could definitely add some help there. Some people believe they'll go tackle, like a Christian Darrisaw if he fell. That would then keep Urza Cleveland at his spot. Or maybe they'll go with the Slater if he falls. Could they trade up? Probably not, because they only have 5 picks unless they use future picks. And then there's a thought that they could also go with a guy like Elijah Vera Tucker, you know, to add a kind of a guard that could also play tackle as well, because, you know, he showed that he could do that last season. So offensive line is kind of their biggest need right now, while still looking for another defensive end potentially. Could add some linebacker depth, and they're still trying to figure out who really that third receiver is, because, like I said, they have, you know, their top 2 guys in Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, but they don't really know who the third is. They have BB back who can compete for that spot, but they could look in the draft to add someone there, and you could probably wait a little bit in the draft to get someone like that. So for them, say they look like they improved in free agency, but there are still some big holes in the offensive line, which is probably going to be addressed early in the draft. But clearly defense was the focus, and we know that Mike Zimmer was not happy with how that played last season. So with some of the big signings that they did make, I mean, clearly they still believe they want to compete, and they want to go compete now. And you could see that with some of the moves, and they wanted defensive help. You know, they just felt like the defense was bad last year, and it really was. For Mike Zimmer's defenses, it was surprising how bad it was. But like I said, they had a lot of youth in that back end, and they tried to address that a little bit with Xavier Woods and Patrick Peterson, and hopefully those young guys for them come back and they're better next season. Hopefully for our case, they're not. Could be looking at another safety. Get Xavier Woods. They could be looking for another safety if they want to. They did, like I said, have that offer out there for Will Parks, but with Xavier Woods, that may be a little bit less of a need, but it's still something they could potentially address with one of those 5 picks. They move on to Green Bay. I just want to stop in real quick to let you guys know that if you guys were ever interested in investing in our favorite sports teams like us as Detroit Lions fans, you guys should check out www.symbol.app. It's a way to basically invest in your favorite sports team and earn a payout when your team wins. So for us as Detroit Lions fans, now we can finally invest in something that we actually know. And with the draft coming up very soon, this is your opportunity to get involved. You guys can use promo code DOD for a $10 bonus deposit. Check it out. Green Bay's free agency wasn't really flashy. It wasn't a lot of splash plays because they didn't have that much money. So yes, salary cap is a real thing. You can do things, you know, to make things happen, but it's there, right? It's legit. So, you know, you have to really understand where you're at financially. And for the Packers, they didn't make many moves in free agency. Actually, you can see they didn't add anybody that wasn't with them, at least up to this point, that wasn't with them last season. Mainly their moves came from re-signing. And the big move they made was Aaron Jones. Their big re-signing was Aaron Jones. They signed him to a really big contract. Mercedes Lewis, the tight end, Kevin King, and Tyler Lancaster. And they lost a couple of names as well. Corey Linsley. So this is like back-to-back years of losing 2 big offensive linemen. Linsley this offseason, and last offseason was Brian Bulaga. Jamal Williams to Detroit, Tim Boyle to Detroit, and Martravius Adams, the defensive end. And then you can see 2 be announced, guys that are kind of just sitting there right now in limbo. Rick Wagner, the former Lion as well. Lane Taylor, the guard. Tavon Austin. I was watching Tavon Austin, West Virginia highlights. Man, there's like 20 million views on that video. It's crazy. Damon Harrison, another former Lion. Snacks. Swervin Irvin. Tyler Irvin is sitting there in free agency. Billy Wynn, James Burgess, Perry Nickerson, John Lovett, the fullback, and of course Raven Green, the safety. So for them, they didn't make many splash moves, and I wouldn't say the Lions want to be in this financial situation where they were, but they do want to get to similarly where the Packers are of. They told us that their plan is to build through the draft, not free agency, so they want to re-sign their guys. That's where they want to use their money, and that's what the Packers did for the most part. Now, a lot of that had to do because they just didn't have money to add things, but that's kind of a spot the Lions want to get. They don't really want to be making huge splashes in free agency. At least that's what they told us. And as you can see from the Green Bay Packers here, that was kind of their entire free agency. Now, the draft, they do have 10 draft picks, so they definitely have a lot of things that they can do in the draft. But what are they looking like now? You know, where's their help at? Well, tackle seems to be a place that they're probably going to, you know, look to add in the draft when it comes to offensive line. Be gone from Rick Wagner, right, who was signed to a 1-year deal. Corey Linsley is also gone. So offensive tackle could be a spot they definitely look to add. Now, they do have Elton Jenkins. They do have Billy Turner there, and they did draft Hanson last season, but the thought is they'll probably go after a tackle at some point because of the fact that they have 10 draft picks. Another thing for them is always receiver, right? Receiver's always there, but for Green Bay, it's probably, you just never really know if they're going to go high receiver because they never seem to. So while it's still out there, is you could go receiver, you got to expect at this point that they're going to wait, and they'll probably grab some kind of gadget receiver, something like that, losing Tyler Ervin and him hitting free agency, unless they bring him back. But with Tyler Ervin gone, it looks like they're probably going to bring in that kind of type of player, and they're losing Jamal Williams as well, who's really good out of the backfield. So maybe like Demetric Felton out of UCLA, maybe someone like that they target. Now, they do have A.J. Dillon, so A.J. Dillon is the number 2 running back, but they could look like for more of a scat back type receiver, but they also could draft a receiver as well. They're also looking for cornerback help because while they did get King back, he struggled last season. 2019 was good, but they're hoping he gets back to that. A lot of fans, however, want them to go to a different direction here, but for them, it's kind of like a stopgap corner, and they're probably going to draft somebody this year. So expect them to draft at least one corner, maybe multiple corners. It's interesting because their new DC does a lot of nickel, and the reason this is interesting is because yesterday when I was working on that Will Parks video, their new defense coordinator, Joe Woods, who I kind of forgot was the in-between defensive coordinator between Wade Phillips and Vic Fangio. So it was Joe Woods in between that. So I got to hear a little bit about Joe Woods as well, who's got a 4-3, basically a background of 4-3, but he has adjusted his defenses, but he expects to run a lot of nickel sets, like a lot of NFL teams have won to. So defensive backs are going to be something you're probably going to see from the Packers draft, especially the cornerback position. At the cornerback position, the Green Bay Packers do have Shannon Sullivan, who's kind of their nickelback right now, but you could always add help to that. Like I said, Kevin King, he's probably going to be gone after this season unless he has a really good year and he's brought back next year. So cornerback is someone they can look. We know they take time to develop. So for them having a year for him to, not be thrown into the fire necessarily would probably be a good move. One of their biggest weaknesses really last season was defensive tackle because they didn't have like a run stuffer. They have Kenny Clark, who's good DT, but one of their biggest problems was they just struggled to stop the run consistently. So I would say don't be shocked if early in the draft they go DT that can really just shut down the run, especially if Kenny Clark can ball. We know that. But they really have struggled with stopping the run, right? That has been kind of an issue for them. So look for them to potentially try to add a run stuffer. And it doesn't have to be early. You can get run stuffers a little bit later in the draft. We've seen that. So potentially look for somewhere in this draft they're going to look to do something like that to pair with Kenny Clark. Inside linebacker, yes, defensive line, defensive tackle can help with the run stopping issues, but inside linebacker could also be a place they look. The Packers really haven't valued that position, it seems like, historically in the draft, at least recently. So that's a place that they may not actually look. We'll see how much they value it because with 10 draft picks, you could easily use one. Always could add weapons. They could always do that. But for them, it was just kind of like, okay, we're just re-signing our guys. We're not going to make any splashes in free agency. And we kind of are still what we are. Yet, they're still the favorites to win the North, of course. They have a really good foundation that they continue to build on there. And they, when you look at who they lost, Jamal Williams, like I said, they have Dillon. They'll probably look for some kind of scat back. Tim Boyle, the quarterback, they have Jordan Love, so they didn't really need to keep him. Montravius Adams, even though our boy Tim Boyle did beat out him, I'm just saying. And the offensive line, right? Offensive line is always a place they're going to look to update to try to protect Aaron Rodgers. So look out for O-line, potentially another backup running back, some kind of scat back little thing, maybe a gadget slot. Look out for probably a receiver at some point with 10 draft picks. Definitely secondary help and also offensive tackle. Those are the kind of places they're looking at. Oh, yeah, and a defensive tackle. But for them, they're a pretty well-built team. There are places, though, they're going to need to improve. And with 10 draft picks, they're hoping to do a lot of that in the draft. But they're going to be a little bit later picks because, of course, they were good last season. I think they set up Aaron Jones' contract really well. So they gave that big deal to Aaron Jones, the $48 million for 4 years. But I think the way they set it up when you look at it, 2023, 2024, the guarantee money really drops off. And that's kind of how you want it. So for them, running backs are usually a lot of times risky with big contracts. But for them, they still sort of have an out near the end of the contract. There's still a little dead money that will be there, but it's not a huge guarantee in 2023 and 2024. So I think they did a nice job how they set up that contract. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears, and some people were kind of coming in this offseason expecting they'd be going win now mode, but then after some of the moves they made, people are considering maybe they're not win now. They're not really sure what's going on here. But as you can see, again, it was a tough financial season, so teams had to make decisions like this. But they added Andy Dalton, so they're going a different route at quarterback. It's no longer going to be the Trubisky show. It is now going to be Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton from the Dallas Cowboys. You're probably getting a better passer here. You're, of course, getting more experience, but not as good as a runner. And Mitch Trubisky signed that one-year deal to be the backup in Buffalo behind Josh Allen there. They also added Jeremiah, whose last name I'm not going to try to say, Angelo Blackson, Christian Jones, the former Lion outside backer there, Elijah Wilkinson. He was actually with Chicago before us. Damian Williams, running back out of Kansas City, and Desmond Trufant, also former Lion, who signed just over $1 million deal. We gave that guy 2 years, $20 million. Yikes. He had a rough season last year, and he had injuries. Then you see the lost players, Mitchell Trubisky, Roy Robertson Harris, who really got the biggest deal out of all these guys, the defensive tackle there. Brent Urban, the defensive end, Barcavius Mingo, the outside linebacker, Rashad Coward, John Jenkins, DeAndre Carter, and Kyle Fuller, who was a recent cut, actually. He signed a one-year, $9.5 million deal. I don't exactly remember where, but he got a pretty big deal after he was cut. And that was a big surprise cut because, they made a big push after Russell Wilson. Then it happened. So people are like, well, are they in win now? Are they not in win now? And they have stated over and over, Andy Dalton's our number one quarterback. That's our guy. But does that mean they won't draft somebody? No, not really. If someone falls in the first round they like, they could take one, or they could take one somewhere else in the draft if they wanted to. But Andy Dalton's only on a 1-year deal. Some of the moves seem like, okay, yeah, could be like pushing for, I think they're kind of like trying to win now, but at the same time, it was just a tough offseason and you had to make tough decisions, and they really thought they could get Russell Wilson, but that fell through, so it was a really tough, break for them, because Russell would have changed really the complexity. Making any splash signings really outside of that. They did re-sign Deion Bush, DeAndre Houston Carson, and they did tag Allen Robinson. Now, taking Allen and not trading him, again, it's kind of like a win-now type of move. But Anthony Miller was reportedly at one point on a trade block. So receivers probably a place they're going to have to look, because, for the future, they're going to have to land some kind of receiver there. They could probably add help for Dalton, even though they have some help now with Allen Robinson coming back for another year. So they're kind of in a weird tweener stage, because they lost some big names like Kyle Fuller, who they recently cut. You can see the to be announced there: Buster Screen, Cordero Patterson, Demetrius Harris, Sherrick McManus, Tayshaun Gibson, who I thought would sign somewhere by now, but I think he will at some point. Dwayne Harris, Daniel McCullers, Jermaine Ifeidi, Patrick Scales, Artie Burns, the cornerback, Jason Spriggs there, James Vaughters, Eddie Pinheiro, and Michael Joseph. They seem to finally have figured out that kicker position, so good for them. Their needs, first off, is offensive tackle. It's in free agency right now. Spriggs in free agency. Offensive tackle is one of their bigger needs heading into this draft. It's somewhere that they could definitely look to target if they want to, and they probably will somewhere. They have the 20th pick, and for the first time in a while, they actually have a first-round pick. Cornerback is also a place to look for them to add as well, with the cutting of Kyle Fuller. That is a pretty big gaping hole to fill. They did add Trufant, but 1-year short-term deal. I mean, they're going to probably draft a cornerback somewhere, and he could help a little bit for this season. That's their hope. Wide receiver, like I said, is definitely be someone they'll probably target as well. Quarterback, it's definitely on the table, no question. And then safety, you can always have some help in the back end. They did re-sign some players like Deion Bush and Houston Carson. Most fans don't necessarily seem thrilled about the options that they have, even with the re-signings across from Eddie Jackson. So a lot of Bears fans want to see him try to improve that. Now, they do have 8 draft picks, but 4 of those draft picks come in the 6th round. So, but they do have a first-round pick, which is nice to them. So it seems like at 20, if one of those top 5 contest quarterback falls to them, they probably would take him, I think. But they probably aren't expecting that to happen, so they're kind of rocking with Dalton this year. But at some point in the draft, they could take somebody. Maybe it comes with one of those 6th-round picks. They grab someone later in the draft. And also, I've seen edge thrown into the mix as potentially a need as well. Now, the latest on Anthony Miller is that there are trade rumors. There are teams involved in trade talks with Anthony Miller. So it seems like it's going to happen at some point. A trade's going to go down. So you'd have Robinson on the 1-year tag, which you could potentially extend. But then you lose Anthony Miller. Receiver then becomes a bigger need for them. People are arguing that they didn't get much better. It seems like, they didn't really go either way. They kind of lost some pieces, but then they added some pieces, and Dalton and the Mitchell Trubisky switch kind of seem in a similar spot, I guess. So I wouldn't say they made huge strides to getting a lot better, and there are clearly some needs here. Like I said, offense, tackle, corner, wide receiver, quarterback, and safety. I don't think Andy Dalton is a great quarterback, but you could make the case that he's an upgrade, at least for right now, in terms of winning now, than Mitchell Trubisky. And again, he's only on a 1-year deal. So if someone falls to them that they like in this year's draft, don't be shocked if they draft him and, bring him in. Let me know, what do you guys think about the Chicago Bears? But I guess that's free agency. I mean, really the team that made the biggest moves probably was Minnesota with their defensive signing. Packers really didn't do anything. They kind of just brought their guys back. Us, we just completely went 1-year heavy deals, and we kind of just revamped everything. All these guys that were going to get set and get bigger deals, we just let them all walk because financially we had to do that. And 2, it's a new regime. We're kind of resetting for this new regime. And then Chicago, they kind of like made some, and they added some and they lost some. So they're kind of in a weird spot here, but the biggest name for them is a new quarterback, and just like us, a new quarterback as well with the whole Goff and Stafford thing. So nothing wrong with not having a very exciting or entertaining free agency. Sometimes that's not a bad thing, that you're just re-signing the guys that were here. I mean, Packers financially were in a good spot, but that's not always a bad thing. Hey, we re-signed our guys. We didn't have to go out and sign it because we had these gaping holes. As a Lions fan, for the money that we came in with financially, what we were able to accomplish, I think, was actually pretty good. And obviously, it's not over yet. We still have some money. But what we were able to accomplish, the amount of holes you were able to fill out, and, when we came in thinking, man, are we going to be able to bring back Galladay or Romeo, to bring back Romeo and still fill out all the positions that we did with, all these 1-year deals? I think it was honestly a pretty good free agency in terms of where we were financially with the restructuring of Jared Goff. So I think it was a pretty strong free agency for us. I know there wasn't these big splashes, but that's not what the Lions want to do anyway. And this is their first year. They're trying to figure out who's going to be long-term. And they want to draft those guys, right? That's their view for Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. But really, both can work. I mean, that's the Lions. That's how they plan to do things, build to the draft. We've seen teams like the Dolphins, when they had all those holes, they had tons of money, and they went out and spent a lot of money. And last season, they looked really good with good coaching, with Brian Flores. So, I think both can work. Both things can happen. We clearly know what the Lions want to do. I think the Vikings made the biggest splashes. They added the most probably talent in free agency. I think the Bears, kind of hit and missed. Let me know what you guys think. I think they got better at quarter. I mean, I'm not saying I think Andy Dalton's a really good quarterback, but I didn't think Mitchell Trubisky was that good. I did like his effort. I just didn't think it was that good. So I understand why they did what they did there. Where they are in the draft, I think it's probably smart to get somebody at quarterback. Not saying you had to go get Dalton, but somebody, because, you know, you're sitting at 20. Yeah, you might want someone, but you're at 20. Like, unless you're like all in for someone, you're like, I'm going to trade up everything to get this guy, you're in a tough spot to grab a quarterback. So it makes sense to at least have somebody for this season to fill out that role. And then, of course, Green Bay, you know, they did what they had. They had not much money, so they re-signed their guys, and that's where they are. And they didn't, you know, lose out on a guy like Aaron Jones. So they kept their, you know, best player in hitting free agency. And they have some holes to fill, but they got draft picks to do it. So, yeah, entertaining free agency all around, I guess. And it's still ongoing, so things are subject to change. Hopefully the Lions can surprise some people this season. So, yeah, that's what the NFC North did this offseason. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. That's the free agency outlook. Thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.